What's going on with JOYTOY Warhammer 40,000 action figure scale? To prepare for this video, I didn't do any deep analysis of the first, second, third, fourth generation figures, and I didn't buy any freshly released figures, as I had originally planned. Because initially I had questions only about the Terminators, not about the whole model range and its manufacturer. Mostly I'm going to talk about Space Marines, but all the other creatures are also tied to the scale, so we can't go without them. JOYTOY started the Warhammer journey with Space Marine figures of the third generation, obviously. Fortunately I have one. His height, without taking into account the backpack and the horn on his head, is 11.7 cm. Then JOYTOY updated the bodies of the figures, pumped up their joints, changed the shoulder pads, and the height of the standard Space Marine became 12 cm. Of course, there were exceptions for named characters, more pumped up warriors, and heroes in the Terminator or Gravis patterns. They were taller comparing to standard primaries. The difference could reach around centimeter. So the height of the Indomitus Terminator was about 13 cm to the top of the head and about 14 to the top of the dome. And this scale scheme worked perfectly. Everyone noticed that the figures became a little taller, but this was absolutely not a critical change, and the old and new figures were combined together without problems. It was under these figure sizes that other factions were included in. Orcs, Tau, Necrons, Greek Death Corps, Imperial Guard, Sisters of Battle, Mechanicus, Custodes, who were canonically larger than Astartes and Primaris, and the scale worked perfectly. Then 2024 came. At the very beginning of it I got Space Marine Vanguard Veteran, who, as far as I understand, was not a Primaris. Here I'd like to remind you that within the canon of the universe, and even the original miniatures initially, it was normal and natural that Primaris are taller than Firstborn Space Marines. This Ultramarine is a Firstborn, according to the pattern of the armor and jump pack he uses. His height, excluding the backpack, is about the same 12 cm as the Primaris. Moreover, he became wider due to more massive shoulder pads, which I and other fans accepted easily as well, because the Games Workshop themselves subsequently leveled the dimensions of the original miniatures with updated models. This scale scheme also showed itself pretty well. Then in 2024 the Horus Heresy line of models began to develop with a powerful pace. And now the height of the Firstborn Space Marine from the 30th millennium has finally become equal to the growth of the Primaris from the 40th millennium. At the same time the first named characters of the Heresy appeared, like Sigismund and all the advanced warriors, who were slightly larger than the standard guys. But also the first alarm bell rang for the scale. Terminators Cataphracti and Tartars were released, and most importantly the Indomitus Terminators were re-released in a new scale. I think they are about the same height, so we look at the example of the Cataphracti pattern. Its height to the top of the head is 14.5 cm, and a little more than 15.5 cm is total height taking into account the dome. This is more than 1.5 cm taller than the old Indomitus. Actually, at that moment, with the release of the first Cataphracti for the Imperial Fists and Indomitus Terminator for the Dark Angels and Ultramarines, all the previous Terminators, which include Terminators of Chaos, Ultramarines, Blood Angels, Grey Knights and even Custodes, became irrelevant and could no longer be combined with the new Terminators, but could still be combined with the ordinary Space Marines. And this is exactly the topic that I wanted to cover in this video, when I started to prepare it. After all, the Space Marine Terminator is not an enlarged Astartes in armor, it is exactly the same size Space Marine guy in larger armor. Here I wanted to refer to the series Angels of Death, where the head of the Terminator and the head of a regular Marine are at almost the same level. The difference in realistic growth between them is probably around 10 cm. And for example to the more recent series Titus, where there is a nice picture which shows that the Terminators is the maximum of a head taller than the regular Primaris, while the difference in the height of the Cataphracti and an Iron Fist in Mark III is almost 2 heads. Naturally, this was also not so critical. Everyone accepted it, and in fact only the lines of all Terminators suffered, which were made for only 3 orders and 3 warbands of chaos. In the summer of 2024 the Tyrannies were released for the first time. A new faction, the dimensions of which were already adjusted rather to the new scale of figures than the old one. There were also some abnormally tall Space Marines released, such as Abaddon in Terminator Cataphracti armor, standing 17 cm tall including the plume, or Ahriman in Mark IV modification, standing over 15 cm tall. These guys became the largest representatives of their armor patterns, which was also well met, but caused some discussion in the community, as did the new scale of Terminators of course. Then autumn came. The release of the game Space Marine 2 and the announcement of the figures of the main characters led by Titus took place, And JOYTOY also posted screenshots of the original miniatures for other legions of the Heresy, which they are going to release in the format of action figures. The first of which were the Blood Angels. But shortly before their release, 2 figures of Ultramarines in Mark 6 pattern Corvus armor were released, which are also not Primaris and belong to the 30th millennium. I didn't have Corvus pattern Sons of Horus, so I cannot compare, but the nameless Ultramarines in Corvus are slightly taller than the fists in Iron, by about 2 or 3 mm. I think this is related to the armor type and head connection. Compared to the standard Primaris, this guy is noticeably more massive. This is not something scary, because the proportions of the Primaris differ from the old generations of armor, even in the miniatures of Games Workshop, and I want to remind you that they leveled the dimensions of the Astartes for the miniatures. And all this could exist together in the JOYTOY's universe, with only one noticeable replacement of the Terminators. But the release of Titus personally surprised me greatly and undermined all my interest in these figures. I don't really understand why no one talks about this. Although everyone sees the obvious, everyone admits it, and the only thing I have heard and seen is the proposal to completely ignore the difference in the scale of the JOYTOY. The trouble is that Titus and the guys are about 14 cm tall. Their proportions are updated for the game visual, since the guys are separate line. These 3 Primaris have become much bigger than all the Primaris from 2024. And in principle, this could also be lived with, because lots of fans initially stated. By the way, I have no idea where they all got such incorrect information from. Titus and company were an exclusive release in a special modified scale, because they have different bodies for the proportions of the Space Marine from the game. Titus would simply be a Space Marine, which you couldn't be able to combine with any of your old Primaris. But perhaps he would more naturally combine with the new Terminators. However, as it turned out, all the new JOYTOY figures after Titus are as huge as he is, and some, due to the specifics of their armor, are even taller and larger than he is. In particular, this concerns the Black Legion and probably the World Eaters. They are really huge, just like the size of the new Terminators, while all of them cannot be Primaris, which would justify their growth boost somehow. As a result, the difference in height between the first generation Red Corsair and the new Black Legionary will be about 4 cm, if not more. But the number here is not as important as the absolute lack of compatibility of such figures, and what is worse, the lack of consistency for JOYTOY. Now let's remember that all the Necrons, Tau, Orcs and other human military organizations are calculated using the old scale, and all of them will look like bugs against the background of the new Black Legionaries. The scale needs to be changed for absolutely everyone now. Even for the Primarchs, because Titus seems to be literally a couple of heads shorter than Guilliman, and at the same time he's taller than the figure of Kalgar, who is noticeably larger in the game. What's funny here is that on the JOYTOY's website, Titus' height is stated as 12.8 cm. Apparently these are some Chinese centimeters or something like that, or I've already gone crazy, but judging by the early photos and the first reviews, this is absolutely not true, which of course doesn't give the manufacturer's reputation any credit. So, since the beginning of production of Warhammer figures, JOYTOY on average once a year makes adjustments to the scale. If earlier they were insignificant and were even directly related to improvements of the models themselves, then since the beginning of 2025 these changes are significant and noticeable. Perhaps I'm wrong, but in my opinion now the JOYTOY model range on Warhammer has finally divided into before and after, where Titus became the border. It even seems to me as if JOYTOY is smoothly moving to the scale from 1/18 to 1/12, in order to unite with McFarlane. The last figures that were not affected by the extreme scale adjustments are Horus Heresy Blood Angels. So I think I'll grab some of them, but right now I'm not sure that I'd like to continue collecting JOYTOY, because it feels like a mockery, cause the entire collection of old model range can not normally stand next to the new guys. Then what are they needed for? I guess if the scale and compatibility are not that important to you and you just enjoy the figures, then all this will seem like empty whining to you, and you'll be right. But I personally discouraged by such meaningless modifications and scale changes, despite the fact that I really wanted to continue collecting these action figures. Probably someday after JOYTOY increases the height of their figures by a couple more centimeters, they will start re-releasing all the 40k figures and all the Heresy figures again in the new scale, and of course there will be demand for this. So, what do you think about the new JOYTOY scale? Is it worth treating it so negatively? And what would you like from the manufacturer in general? Please leave comments, I'll be happy to talk to you and discuss all the interesting points. And maybe it will help someone to rethink all the scale modifications for the collection and take this whole situation easier. That would be great. For now I say goodbye to you. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.